And welcome into Juck on Bucks. Appreciate you so much for joining me. I tried, guys. I tried to put the headphones on. I tried. I got the Bose ones. I got the Shure ones, and I can't figure it out. I can't figure out how to get the audio to come through the headphones. The reason I was trying to do this is to kind of retrain myself, as I've been yelling a lot lately. I feel so. I'm trying to lower my volume, and I do that very nicely with the headphones on, which is what they're for. I can't get them to work. I can't figure out the proper settings. So I'm just going to try to not yell. I don't think this topic today is going to make me yell, as we're on the good side of this one and there's nothing here to irritate me. But I did want to go over the kind of juxtaposition of what could have been with Nico Iamaleava and what is with Julian Sayin right now, as we're looking at this game coming up with Ohio State and UCLA. Two guys coming out of high school that went on very different paths, but man, coming out, they were two guys with a whole lot of similarities. But they went about things very differently. And Julian Sayin from Carlsbad, California, Nico from Downey, California, Long Beach area, both two of the top three quarterbacks in their class. Some classes, there's a big standout number one, like Bryce Underwood was in 2025. In other classes, there's like a consensus top three, and you can kind of pick or choose who's your number one. In Nico's class, the class of 2023, it was Nico and Arch Manning. And many people would have put Nico number one, but his name wasn't Nico Manning. Nico was out there on the 7-on-7 circuit, playing in pretty good high-level competition in high school. Arch, on the other hand, played at Newman, where Peyton and Eli played, and Cooper, which is a private school in Louisiana that, it just doesn't play the best competition. And you've probably seen clips of some of the teams Arch played against with, very subpar competition. We'll put it that way. It doesn't mean you can't shine in lower level ball, and that doesn't translate, as Arch really has been playing really good recently. But in that class of 2023, Nico, Arch stand out. In 2024, you got a three-pack of dudes at the top. Julian Sayin, DJ Lagway, Dylan Raiola. Dylan Raiola, of course, one time a Buckeye commit, ends up committing to Georgia, then eventually to Nebraska. That's after 4 different high schools. And he's now at Nebraska, and he's doing pretty damn good at Nebraska, to be honest. But the three of them, DJ Lagway goes to Florida, and obviously Julian Sayin goes to Alabama. But those three were the 2-4-7, 1-2-3, with the composite being Julian Sayin number one, Lagway number two, Raiola number three. And you could have gone to ESPN, 247's internal, on three, and found them in any order, 1, 2, 3. But those were the consistent top three everywhere. Nico's competition in 2023, like, he's as close to a can't miss kid coming out of high school as there was. There was zero chance that he was going to flame out, and the upside tremendous. A kid with a 6'5" frame. There was no flame out possibility with him, right? Like, the floor was very, very high because of his athleticism. Even if the arm isn't working out great athlete, great leader at 6'5" with a cannon for an arm, and people gravitate towards him, got his head on his shoulders, can make a lot of the throws coming out of high school. Didn't have tremendous touch, but just a cannon. Also a tough runner, also a 5-star volleyball recruit, just a really great athlete, no character concerns, and a kid that was all about sports. And when we look at the top quarterbacks coming out in that class, outside of Arch and him, you had Dante Moore, Jackson Arnold, Malachi Nelson, CJ Carr, Ethan Grunkmeyer, some guys that will be some good quarterbacks moving forward. And then some guys like Jackson Arnold, who's not really looking like he's going to be the dude. Malachi Nelson, obviously a huge bust. Jaden Davis, who committed to Michigan. He'll never play at Michigan. Ryan Puglisi, he will be a starter at Georgia soon. Obviously CJ Carr and Dante Moore, now probably the best of that group. But a decent class all in all. If Arch and and Puglisi end up being something, CJ Carr something. Sayin's competition beyond those top three. I mean, when you look at Sayin and you stack him against Raiola and Lagway, it shows you kind of how unique Sayin is, because Sayin, at the time was built very, very frail. And Lagway is a big kid with a cannon of an arm and a good enough athlete to be a 5-star linebacker. No joke. Raiola can throw the ball 80 yards, and he's a big, strong kid as well. And then you got Sayin, again, 247's composite number 1, over those two, looking like an 8th grader next to them. And that kind of highlights just how different his arm is, just how special his accuracy is, and the things he can do in the throws he can make. It just shows how different he is to be rated above those guys. So that's both of those guys coming out of high school. Nico, Oregon was up there, Tennessee was up there, you had Georgia, Bama, ultimately chooses Tennessee, as they did something that we had never seen before. Paid a quarterback very publicly a huge NIL deal, $8 million, it was reported. And it was the first use of NIL that was very public in that way. Blatantly out there for everybody to see. They didn't even deny it. They had lawyers draw up the contract in such a way that it would be very, very difficult to prove that he was, it was pay for play. But eventually the NCAA did come calling and was going to take a look. They attempted to go after it, and Tennessee took them to court. And at that point, the NCAA loses in court and then decides we're not investigating this stuff anymore. So the wheels totally come off. The NCAA hadn't really been looking at anything, but then they went and looked at Florida and Florida State. We're on their way to Tennessee, and then that was it. It was done. They lose, and they say, forget it, we're out of this. We're not looking at any of these NIL deals. And that's kind of when the wheels came off, and it was like, all right, there are no rules. Do whatever you want. So you can blame Tennessee for that. It would have happened at some point anyway, but any chance we can get to blame Tennessee, we'll go ahead and give them that blame. Josh Heupel. Nico commits to Josh Heupel, and a guy with no history of developing NFL quarterbacks, none at all. And NFL quarterbacks generally don't succeed coming out of a system like Heupel. No huddle, up tempo, spread the wide receivers way out. The wide receivers are running option routes. It's just not conducive to what anybody in the league does. And Nico went there anyway because he thought it would be fun. But obviously, it paid a lot of money. Julian Sayin, on the other hand, a huge Bryce Young fan. Bryce Young was kind of like his role model, another kid out of California who won the Elite 11 like Julian would go on to do. And Julian watched those Elite 11 films over and over of Bryce and watched Bryce's highlights. And he wanted to be just like Bryce. And he also wanted to play for Nick Saban at Alabama like Bryce. And that's why he went to Alabama. And he was there at Alabama for the Rose Bowl that they lost against Michigan. He was there with them for that bowl prep. Nico at Tennessee, he was average. He was average in the Tennessee offense for 2 years as a starter. In 2024, led him to the playoffs. Didn't end well for him in the playoffs, but 2,600 yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 63% completion percentage. The long ball, 32%. You got to be better than that in that Tennessee offense. Completions in the SEC, 6th, 8th in passing yards, 7th in passing touchdowns, 7th in efficiency, total yards, 10th. And he got a ton of attention and a ton of talk about him. A lot of it because he was such a highly ranked guy, and a lot of it was because of the way he looks. I mean, just a cool looking Polynesian dude that's, he just looks like we've never seen a quarterback quite like him. He's just different. He's long and slender, but at the same time, really strong and a great athlete. He's just a unique kid and got a ton of attention. But the truth is, at Tennessee, he was just average. He was always just average. And then Tennessee goes into spring practice this year, and we start hearing the noise that Nico wants more money. And then we hear that Nico has sat out of practice. And all right, the writing's on the wall here. Tennessee's got to do something. Either they're going to acquiesce and pay him and be everybody on that roster's mark, or they're going to do what they did, which is draw a hard line in the sand. And kudos to them, but let's not forget, they're also the ones who got themselves involved in this mess. They're the ones who did this, paid this ridiculous amount of money to a guy with a family full of hanger-ons. And we've now since seen this. Tennessee absolutely saw this back then, and they chose to move forward with it anyway. But props to them anyway, as they said, this is not how a quarterback on our team is going to behave. We're not paying you anymore. We made you the highest paid quarterback in the sport by a large margin. You have not outperformed that contract, so Nico hits the portal. Julian Sayin, on the other hand, gets the news that Nick Saban will be retiring. He wanted to play for Coach Saban. Didn't like the thought of the unknown, had no clue who they were going to hire. He enters the transfer portal. Ohio State had recruited him, and it didn't go very far. Buckeyes end up with Aaron Noland in that class, another top 5 quarterback per the 247 composite. In fact, he was number 4 in that composite. But Bill O'Brien, who Ohio State had just hired as the offensive coordinator, had facilitated a lot of the recruiting of him at Alabama, was able to open up the door very quickly to Julian Sayin in Ohio State. Facilitated the dialogue, and now all of a sudden, Julian Sayin wants to come to Ohio State. And Ohio State has a decision to make. Should we take him? I mean, we've got Aaron Noland in this class. We've told Aaron Noland he's going to be the only quarterback in this class. Ryan Day eventually comes to the decision that, yes, it's only fair to my team to make them the best team possible. Despite going back on my word to Aaron Noland that he'd be the only quarterback in this class, I think Julian Sayin is the better quarterback. I've got to bring him in. So he brings him in. And Ryan Day talked about that situation recently, bringing Sayin in. They had no money for him. They had no NIL money for him. They just got Will Howard tied up with $1 million. And, the most expensive transfer portal class we'll probably ever see at Ohio State was that class right there. And all that money was tied up in that class. They had no money to pay Sayin some big NIL package to transfer. And Sayin and family said, that's okay. That's okay. This is where we want to be to develop as an NFL quarterback. Now, everybody's situation is different. It would be short-sighted to say that that's the proper way to do things and Nico did it wrong, just wanted money, because we don't know everybody's life circumstances. But if you truly believe in yourself as a talent, number 1 on your list is always going to be who's going to develop me to not just get drafted, but to succeed when I'm there. And that was first on the Sayin family and Julian's mind, without a doubt, when they went to Bama and then immediately to Ohio State and Ryan Day. And on the other hand, you look at Nico, that was not on their mind first with the Tennessee thing. And it certainly wasn't when they decided to hold out, overplay their hand, and get themselves in a bit of a conundrum with a trash reputation in the transfer portal, thanks to his dad. And I a lot of people put this on Nico, and you got to stand up to your family. And I understand that, but like, dude, he's 20 years old. You rely on your parents when you're 20 for a lot of things, especially if you're in a tight family and they appear very tight. And, you listen to what your parents tell you. You don't know things that you don't know. You don't know the way of the world. He thought he was doing the right thing. The parents, the hangers on, they guided him very, 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 very wrongly. And he ends up committing to UCLA because nobody wants to touch him with a 10-foot pole, man. It's a terrible look what he did. And he gets himself a pay cut. Trying to get more money, gets himself a pay cut, which, poetic justice. Everybody kind of loved the story, especially after it leaked that the camp reached out to Dan Lanning to try to see if they had any interest in bringing him in while he was still at Tennessee. Lanning then rats him out to Tennessee. Obviously, Oregon was second on his list, and then Oregon, it was in the midst of Oregon and all the Phil Knight and the money stories and the high-profile transfer portal signees and their big class, and it just looked so tacky that Tennessee was who they reached out to. Like, we want some money. Oregon. Let's call Oregon. It just looks so bad. But he ends up going to UCLA as Deshaun Foster had just signed Appalachian State's Joey Aguilar out of the portal. In an effort to save his job, he thought, if I bring in Nico, it'll turn everything around. So he brings in average Nico. UCLA ponies up $1 million, which, again, poetic justice that he gets a pay cut. He goes to UCLA, which brings us to where we're at now. Transfer from Alabama, Julian Sayin. Just a blip at Alabama. I don't even like calling him a transfer. He was at Alabama for a week, and he is Ohio State's quarterback. Made two really sound, smart decisions to get to where he's at now. And then you got Nico coming in with UCLA, who made two very poor decisions to get where he is now. Nico obviously had a huge win this year against Penn State, where he really showed grit and toughness, which I think everybody feels he is that kind of player. He is a gritty, tough dude. You know, he's got 500 yards rushing on the year, and they're depending on that. Last year, passing, 2,600 yards passing, 19 touchdowns, 5 picks, 63% accuracy. This year at UCLA, it's just about the same. 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, 7 picks, a little bit up there, but 63% accuracy again. And he's rushed for more yards already. So Nico, an average quarterback, but a gamer. And I was at that Tennessee game, which needs a name, doesn't it? The Ohio State-Tennessee playoff game of 2024. We need a name for that game. Nico obviously had 2 of his helmets cracked. Famously, that story will go down in lore. A special helmet he was wearing that's prone to cracking in cold weather. So, we're not going to tell anybody else that story, but it was, we didn't see anybody else's helmet crack, but Nico's did because of the design of that particular helmet. But the dude was an absolute gamer, man. Like I said, I was at the game. It was honestly, it's one of my top 3 Ohio State games I've ever been to. It was just awesome. And the only thing that stood out from that Tennessee team was Nico. He just kept coming and coming and coming, and the Buckeye defense abused him. And there was no quit in him. And he earned my respect that night. And Ryan Day's, that's for sure. And the Buckeyes are ready for him on Saturday. But things aren't going great, and things won't get any better at UCLA as he doesn't even have a head coach. What does his development look like? Who has any idea? And now, this is his 3rd year. What's he doing after this year? Is he going to enter the draft? Is he going to take a swing? Or is he going to try another year in college to develop a little more? He's nowhere near ready, but he's still got those tools. He's got those traits. So somebody will take a flyer on him in the draft, who knows where, if he does enter the draft. But what happens if he makes the decisions that Sayin makes? What happens if he goes somewhere that knows how to develop quarterbacks? Julian Sayin, sitting here in his first year starting with 2,500 yards, 24 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and an almost 81% completion percentage that nobody could teach him. It's a God-given ability. Average depth of target, 8.7 yards, which highlights how insane that 81% completion percentage is, as Bo Nix set the record for completion percentage in a season at like 78.4, but his average depth of target was 6.4-ish yards. Julian 2 yards further down the field, which, every half a yard in that average is substantial when we talk about accuracy. But there's obviously a massive lesson to be learned here about how to handle things coming out of high school if you're trying to develop. And what I like to do sometimes is go back, and this is probably a perfect video to do that in, and kind of look at the class as they were coming out, at the quarterbacks, and going back and just taking a look at that class with Arch and Nico. So you had Arch, Nico, and Dante Moore. All 3, at minimum, solid starters, right? So Arch coming around now after sitting on the bench for 2 years and looking much better. Nico is who he is. We'll see what happens at the end of this year. And then, of course, you got Dante Moore, who committed to UCLA, played there for a year with Chip Kelly, then sat after transferring at Oregon for a year last year behind Dylan Gabriel, and now looks like he's going to be a very, very good Oregon quarterback moving forward. We'll have them in the playoffs this year, and who knows what they'll do. Jackson Arnold was one of the very, very best, and he was talked about nonstop. He ends up going to Oklahoma, fizzles out there, gets kind of pushed out of town, and Hugh Freeze and Auburn pick him up, and he was terrible and just kind of proved that he's definitely not that guy. He's not that kind of quarterback, ends up getting benched, and who knows what happens with him next. My guess would be he ends up transferring out of Auburn, and we'll see him somewhere else next year, probably dropping down a rung, definitely out of the SEC. And then you got Malachi Nelson. What an absolute disaster of a route that he's been on. I don't know how many schools he's on now, but it's a lot. As we move down further, you got Chris Vizina to Clemson, Jaden Rashada, Arizona State. Of course, he was committed to Florida, ends up at Arizona State, then transfers to Georgia, then transfers to, I think, Texas San Antonio or UTEP, one of those schools. Had a good game against Texas. Not a good game, but he scored a touchdown. And it was just crazy seeing him out there in that uniform. This is a guy that so much talk about this dude over the last 3 years, all for a quarterback who is not even a Power 4 quarterback. Then you got Eli Holstein, who committed to Bama, went to Pitt. He just got benched for an Ohio freshman who is lighting it on fire out at Pitt. And Avery Johnson stays in hometown kid, goes to Kansas State. And he's certainly not been what a lot of people thought he would be. But nonetheless, he's a fun quarterback at Kansas State. Will Howard got pushed out of Kansas State to start him. And Will Howard went and won a national championship. So it worked out for everybody. Austin Novosad at Oregon passed over by a walk-on. Well, he's behind a walk-on the depth chart. Oregon fans not happy about that. They want to see Novosad. They want to see what he's got. And in Sayin's class, the class of 2024, you had Sayin. This is the composite here. Sayin, Lagway, who has had a really rough season and just got benched in this last game. And that is pretty embarrassing. The guy is a turnover machine, but again, a fantastic athlete. So Lagway, then Raiola, one-time Buckeye commit, one-time Georgia commit, doing pretty well at Nebraska. He's kind of their golden boy. Then you got Aaron Noland riding the pine down in South Carolina after he transferred down there. I don't know who that kid is that's at Florida State, or if he's even there. Mike Norvell is going to be fired soon. CJ Carr, Lloyd Carr's grandson, of course, spurns Michigan. Ethan Grunkmeyer, the Ohio kid, was a top 10 quarterback, and I think he'll be pretty good there at Penn State. Walker White at Auburn. Jaden Davis at Michigan. He is going to fizzle out. He'll be out of there after this year. I really like Ryan Puglisi. Excellent quarterback. Really talented kid. More talented than Gunnar Stockton. We'll probably see him sooner than later, but Gunnar has had a good year. And then you got Jake Merklingler at Tennessee, who just very well might be passed up by the two successive quarterbacks Tennessee has brought in after him. But anyway, that is the story, and I just wanted to talk about this as the juxtaposition of Julian Sayin's career and Nico's career. Obviously, Julian, a much more talented kid, but at the time, both of them coming out, Nico very well could have been a top number 1 overall draft choice. That's what a lot of people thought of him, and you just never know what's going to happen, how they're going to develop. Would he have been in a better situation now had he not gone to Tennessee, not chased that $8 million, played in Josh Heupel's gimmicky offense? Would he been in a much better position now? Would we be talking about him coming out this year as one of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks coming out? I think so. Not the number 1 overall pick, but if he had gone and played for Ryan Day and started 2 years, or Lincoln Riley, or somebody who can make a quarterback better and showcase the best of that quarterback. Yeah, man, bad decisions, but also a bad decision by Tennessee. A bad decision by Tennessee, and it's always a bad decision to latch yourself on when you see warning signs to someone that has some hangers on, some groupies, some family that like the whole thing a little too much. But anyway, That's that. We'll be back on a little later with another couple of, I think a couple videos. I got a lot to say today.